Hello everyone, I'm here to give you some pointers on how to conduct your undergraduate project, your final year project. My presentation will cover how to start your UGP, how to conduct your UGP. Now for most of you, if not all, this may seem impossible. But you're not alone. The late Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Thus, it is actually possible. How do you start? Well, the first thing is to have a look at a good sample of an undergraduate project thesis. It will give you an idea of what to expect at the end of the day. Now, since good is quite subjective, you may want to get a few samples of good thesis, preferably those from your supervisor. If you can't have from your supervisor, then any good thesis will do. Next, have a look at a sample of published paper, possibly taken from a UGP thesis. Now, this published paper would have been recognized by outsiders. Next, where do you begin? You have to understand clearly what each term in the title means. The title has been provided by your supervisor. You can do a keyword search online, journal paper, textbook. Remember, something may seem different in different contexts. Say a microturbine may mean 10 to the power 12 kilowatt power turbine, but in microchannel, it means 10 to the power minus 6 meter. Determine what the approach to be used in your project, whether it's going to be experimental, theoretical, numerical, case study. This you may discuss with your supervisor. And identify what the focus of your UGP is. Is it going to be the whole system, perhaps the whole air conditioning system, or just the evaporator component, or just the cooling process, or the coolant itself, the material? Where do you begin? Now, by now, your supervisor will have given you the objectives and scopes. Now, you have to understand each of the term and the whole title in its context. Then, when all the terms have been understood, you would have gotten by now what's the issue you're going to serve. You're going to optimize, analyze, enhance, minimize, change some parameters, investigate, model, simulate. And what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, how you're going to go about it, where is it being applied, who did what when. Yes. And all this is included. You will gain all this from doing a literature review of journals and books. Note, Wikipedia is not acceptable as a source of reference. However, you may use Wikipedia to get an initial understanding for some of the terms and concepts. Then you plan your project. Yes, the Gantt chart. Now, this Gantt chart is only providing you with guidelines how to obtain your objectives, covering your scopes within the stipulated time. Now, then you work on your plan, discuss with your supervisor. Well, overwhelmed about feeling of something to do, I don't know where to start. But you have these 3 steps already covered. By now, you should have a look at the good UGP thesis and paper, check. You understand the title well, your approach to objectives and scope, check. Now you have your Gantt chart to plan your project. You have already taken the first few steps towards doing your undergraduate project. Now let's go, a literature review, going through past studies. Now, why do you have to do a literature review? It provides a context for the research. See, where understanding the circumstances of your study, of the issue at hand, to justify the research, why you're doing what you're doing. Is it to ensure the research hasn't been done before? Well, no, because this is just an undergraduate project. If it hasn't been done before, it's great. But if it has, don't worry about it. To show where the research fits into the existing body of knowledge, to enable you to learn from previous theory on the subject, illustrate how the subject has been studied previously, highlight flaws in previous research, outline gaps in previous research, and show that the work is adding to the understanding and knowledge of the field. Remember, you may walk the same path as a previous researcher. This is just a final year project. Weekly discussion with your supervisor is a must. How do you do a literature review? Well, you should at least get one, if not several, journals from your supervisor after the first 2 weeks. Now, this is a sample. You see here, read the journal abstracts to get the gist of what the report is all about. So this report, this abstract of the particular sample here, shows the prediction accuracies of the two-phase heat transfer coefficient. The objective is to minimize the mean average error. And then you read the conclusion. So the paper, the studies have managed to reduce the mean average error between the predicted and experimental data. So you have then identified what the researchers did, why, to reduce the error, how, using genetic algorithm, where is it being applied, who, when, and then you fill up this table that will be good in future to refer to in case you've forgotten which paper you have read and what you obtained from those reading. Yes. You read only the papers that can help you achieve your objectives. Perhaps you have 10 by now collected from the internet, yeah, but only a few may be useful, may be really closely related to what you're going to do. So you identify the theory, equations, assumptions, circumstances, then you select the particular study you want to follow explicitly. Understand why? Because you are nobody. So whatever you do, you have to justify based on previous researchers' reports. Keep all bibliography and references so you may refer to them again in future. So discuss, write notes, write how you would explain, because this is where you learn to like your own writing. What will you do to achieve your objectives? After doing the literature review, you have by now identified the methodology to be done to achieve your objective. So are you going to repeat what others have done? Same method is acceptable, of course, because it's just an undergraduate project. Same method, maybe perhaps modification is done because your supervisor may want something new out of the study. Different method. So again, remember the what, why, how, where, who, and when. Important questions while you're doing your research. And based on the literature review, decide on a method with justifications. So guidelines to conduct your UGP. You have done literature review in UGP 1, identified the justified method, UGP 1, present it, and then you apply the selected methodology. Then you collect the data, UGP 2, and then you have convert your data into presentable outcomes, graphs, charts, etc. You discuss and you conclude. Remember to write before, during, and after. So, literature review is actually an exercise in searching for information. You start with general reading from earliest formation. Is it on energy issue, efficiency issue, model issue, who, what, why, to recent theory and applications. Among your references, there must be a few from the last 3 years to show the importance of your study. Who did what and why. So from those literature review, you can identify what's lacking, missing, new theory, method, perspectives, and then you come up with the problem statement. Then you have your objective, yeah, and your scopes. Remember, although your objectives and scopes have been set by your supervisor, you still have to convince yourself and the examiners about the importance of the study. What, why, how, where, who, and when. Now, the objectives and scopes may have been set by your supervisor, but they may change, though not much, later, and may change to suit the UGP as you progress into your project. Now, in the beginning, you have your title given by your supervisor, and at the end of UGP 2, you have to come up with the work, with the report. Yes, so it's your responsibility to link, yeah, from literature review, problem statement, justified methods, applied methods, the results discussion, etc. So theory. I know in the school, the theory is not given a specific rubric, but it is an important part of your methodology. It's the foundation. You have to introduce the physics, the equations, the model that describe the problem you're trying to solve, the original, the basics. Yes. And then you list and justify the assumptions, cross-referencing with the literature review that you have done. Remember, again, you are nobody. So whatever assumptions cross-referencing must be justified. Present the equations, the cases, the model to be used, and how they are to be used in your study. So the theory, you have to analyze the equations, the model, the case, how things are represented. Can they be simplified? How things affect each other. Investigate possibilities. Don't be afraid to try new things. You know, what the parameters that can be controlled, materials, flow regime, etc. The methodology itself, you have to decide what you want to change in your method. What parameters, what process, what model, material, etc. Then you establish a systematic procedure to obtain your objectives using the method you have selected, following standards. Okay. From the literature review, you would have identified tables of values, constants and variables, design parameters, and how you're going to go about changing and varying the parameters and getting the outcomes of your project. So remember to list the variation of parameters explicitly in the table clearly, so not only you but the examiners will understand them. Think carefully how you're going to make comparisons using graphs and other visual aids at the end of your UGP 2. Some preliminary results are expected at the end of UGP 1, perhaps initial case study or establish a model, selected methodology, parameters to be changed, initial hypothesis, among others. It has to be convincing. For the UGP 1 evaluation, the implementation is worth 50%, the report is 20%. That means your supervisor is responsible to 70%, and the oral, the video at the end of UGP 1 is worth 30%. The 20% from the report must have the problem statement, objectives and scopes, literature review and project background, methodology. And the oral, which now turns into a video presentation, is worth 30%. For this coming semester, the interim evaluation is being introduced. Remember earlier I mentioned that UGP 1 is worth 70% from your supervisor. Sometime between the 4th and 6th week, your supervisor is going to evaluate you and it's going to be worth 15%. And the final is 65%. Whereas for UGP 2, your supervisor is responsible towards 30%, with the interim worth 5% and the final 25%. But you have to wait for the final announcement from the UGP committee. The standard structure, okay, all the UGPs, a systematic investigation to establish facts and reach conclusions. Remember to write. So finally, at the end of UGP 2, you have the outputs, the data, how you process the data and present them, analyze, conclude, recommend, with a list of references. So you plan your work your plan, methodology followed, parameters defined and selected, complete. So when you're conducting your UGP work, whether you're choosing experimental study, modeling, theoretical, you have to identify what exactly you are doing, whether it's a real size, lab size, software or your own code, and why you're doing it. Giving a reason that is MCO is not acceptable. It has to be justified by cross-referencing with previous studies. So UGP 2 evaluation, the implementation itself is worth 10%. It's quite small. But you have the article 10%, report 20%. So in the end, your supervisor is responsible towards 40%. The moderator is the person who will read your final thesis, 40%, and the oral video presentation is 20%. So UGP 2 evaluation, the report 20%, comprised of problem statement, objectives and scopes, literature review and project background, methodology with justification, yes, results, and then analysis of those results and discussion, report format and writing skill, conclusion and recommendations, and finally you write your abstract. So the report is worth 20% given by your supervisor, but the moderator who is going to read the final draft is going to give you out of the 40% certain percentage. UGP evaluation, so you have here UGP 1, yes, presentation is 30%. For UGP 2, presentation is 20%. And that man in the armor with the sword, yes, the moderator is going to give you 40% or less. So communication is important. You must have weekly meetings with your supervisor. Well, now it's easy to have virtual meetings through WebEx, Zoom, etc. Emails, WhatsApp, text messages, call. Yes, the train has started to move. Are you in?